Welcome. We're excited to have you join us again for our Connected Communities series. This week, we'll be discussing mindful nourishment and healthy eating. Let's talk about intuitive eating or mindful eating. Eating with a purpose to achieve a specific goal or outcome, and changing the way we think about food and how it affects our bodies and responds to our trauma experiences. Trauma can affect how our body processes food and can negatively impact healthy eating. We can lose control or restrict control over what we eat. For example, it can cause our bodies to do emotional overeating, or we could undereat. Trauma can cause you to either lose your appetite or wanting to eat food that comforts you. There are many other related behaviors based on our trauma experiences. This is where intuitive eating or mindful eating can make a positive difference in your mental and physical well-being. Unhealthy eating affects the body in a multitude of ways. When eating unhealthy food, the body is trying to process excess sugar or salt. These effects of unhealthy foods can show up in different ways, such as fatigue, acid reflux, poor sleep, decreased energy, or bloating. Some long-term or more serious effects are depression, teeth or bone issues, heart disease, or stroke. Being mindful of what you put in your body helps you to focus on obtainable goals. That can also help you to feel comfortable and confident in your own skin, which all affects the mind and body. This shows that the mind and body are intertwined and have the power to affect and influence each other. Consequently, while food alone cannot heal you from trauma, eating healthy can positively impact your mental health and can help you heal the body and mind. We are so excited and incredibly honored to welcome back Jessi Hoey to lead this week's session. Jessi stumbled into the practice of yoga as a way to manage IBS and mental health. She quickly fell in love with the physicality of yoga and began her training in 2013. She had no idea of the depth of philosophy and sacred history that this training would introduce her to, which has completely transformed her life and plunged her into a never-ending journey of self-discovery. She shares the practice of yoga with others as an offering of profound transformation and is excited about seeing her community evolve in awareness and consciousness. She is a forever student of the ancient mystery, schools of wisdom, earth medicines, and healing practices, and is always gathering more knowledge to integrate her own life and to share it with her students. She teaches from the heart, using her own experience and vulnerability to create a safe space for others to open up to the profound and ineffable mystery of being.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me again. My name is Jessi. I am a holistic nutritionist and yoga teacher, and I'm coming to you with this particular session to discuss the mindful practice of nourishment. This is a topic that I'm really super passionate about, and in our society, it becomes really difficult to talk about diet and nutrition without sort of dealing with the really negative connotations that come from body image and that come from a very toxic way of really looking at eating in general. And so we're not going to go down that route of weight loss or eating in a way to change the body. Instead, I like to approach nutrition from this place of, everything that we take from outside of ourselves to inside has the potential to alter our state of being. So we're going to look at a few different things that can alter our mindset, which is important. I do a lot of talk in my career with nutrition and mental well-being. This is a huge thing that's on the rise. And I love to look at working with diet and nutrition specifically because it feels a little bit more like we are empowering ourselves through the choices that we make around food. And there is definitely a belief around this idea that it is too expensive to eat healthy. And what I find really interesting about making some changes to our diet, when we're actually getting the nutrients that we need, we're not as hungry. And so actually, when we are filling ourselves with the right sustenance, our appetite goes down because we're getting what we need versus a lot of what is considered in our modern day diet to be sort of like empty calories. You hear a lot as well. But this idea that the food that we're eating is actually void of nutrients. And so the body, being this like living being, intuitively knows that you need nutrients. And so it will continue to send you those hunger cues until you get what you need, especially in the situation of deficiency. Something that I find very interesting, having a background personally of eating disorders and some trauma that led to a war with food, is that something like a zinc deficiency, which is an essential nutrient that not only supports the immune system, when the body is deficient in zinc, it contributes to body dysmorphia. So body dysmorphia is that when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we're not seeing ourselves as we are. We're seeing ourselves through this distorted lens. And it's a very important thing to understand that these type of nutrients play a role on how we see ourselves, how we perceive ourselves and others in the world around us. And so that being said, then all of a sudden food becomes this thing. I mean, we are interacting and engaging with food daily. And it can become something that we use as a tool versus just this mindless thing that we engage in order to survive. So I'm super passionate about this topic. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and something that I've been really journeying with for several years now. I've been practicing holistic nutrition for about 7 years, and I would say really it's taken me about 5 years to really start to shift my own personal relationship with food. So this is not an overnight thing. This is in general with mindfulness, which is why I like to introduce nutrition and mindfulness together as one piece, because without that level of mindfulness, it's very difficult to make changes of any kind, especially with diet. And so looking at food in this way is really what helped for me to buy in and to understand how food was interacting with my mood, how certain food choices are going to really sort of shift the way that I see myself and the way that I show up in life. And being somebody who has been working with depression and anxiety and, unpacking certain traumatic experiences in my life, having the ability to do little things, like breath work and like choosing certain nutrients to support my mental well-being has been one of the most empowering things. And unfortunately, what I discovered as a holistic nutritionist, that it wasn't enough to know. I went to school, I got all of the education, and I still sort of thought maybe that knowing was going to be enough to just make perfect decisions all the time, and that's not the case. And so this level of mindfulness was that missing component where I really was forced to kind of look at myself and why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling? Where is this choice that I want to make coming from? And understanding the relationship between the mind, the emotions, the external set and setting, and the decisions that we're making when it comes to fueling and nourishing the body. So this is maybe something that, like I said, it's taken me a good 5 years, and even still, mindfulness is a moment to moment practice. So it's not something that you just like master, it's something that you are actively engaged in. And so my hope with this talk is that it just inspires you maybe to just kind of pay a little bit more attention to how you interact with food and how food interacts with you, and how we can start to maybe experiment with making little changes that seem feasible for us at the journey that we're on right now, or at the juncture that we find ourselves in, and start to experiment with applying mindfulness to the way that we eat. So I'm going to share my screen with you here so that we can dive into this presentation. And oops, here we go. Okay, so the mindful practice of nourishment. We're going to explore diet as a mindful practice for mental health and well-being. And there are so many other ways to explore the practice of nourishment. I don't even like using the word diet. Okay, so this is my favorite question to start all of these talks with, because it starts to get you thinking. Why do we eat? Okay, often when I do a live presentation in person, I get people to put their hands up and answer the question. And most of the time, although I did a presentation recently where there was more honesty coming from the group than usual, which I love, most of the time we know the right answer. We know the right answer. Why do we eat? A lot of the answers that I hear coming up are we eat for sustenance, we eat to stay alive, we eat to nourish the body, for energy. Right? We know these things, and so we're able to give the quote unquote right answer. But what's the real driving force behind the choices that we're making around food? So if we believe that we eat to fuel and nourish the body, then how do we explain the choices that we make sometimes around processed foods, or excessive eating, or indulging in sweet and salty cravings, or late night snacking? There's a lot of mindlessness that kind of goes into some of these choices that we're making for food. So we understand intuitively and innately that we are supposed to be eating to nourish ourselves, and yet that's not really what's driving our choices. So what really drives our decisions around food, and that's what we're going to be unpacking in this this conversation. This is one of my favorite quotes. And we want to take it with a grain of salt. It's not suggesting that, there is no need or no place for medicine. There really, truly is. But this is pointing to this idea that when diet is wrong, medicine is of no use. When diet is correct, medicine is of no need. And this is over 3,000 years old. The practice of Ayurveda is where this particular belief system comes from, which is rooted in Eastern Indian, especially from India. So this idea that our diet, we've maybe all heard the quote from Hippocrates, that something about I'm going to butcher this now because it's not right in front of me, but that medicine is our food and food is our medicine, right? We've heard these types of quotes before. Okay, so how does that actually work? And is that really relevant to us now? Okay, so we're going to look at some of the key influencing factors of what's driving our choices behind food. It's important to understand, like this rhetorical question of why do we eat? We know the right answer, but that's not actually what's driving our choices around food. And so what is? And in order for us to make any type of a change or bring mindfulness to any particular topic, we have to kind of dive deep in and unpack it. So habitual eating. Okay, there are many factors that influence the way that we eat. Especially like our upbringing, the families that we were raised in, we typically tend to either adopt a very similar diet as the families that we grew up within, or maybe we rebel a little bit. Our society, our culture, what's actually available. Other factors are our budget. How much money can we afford to spend on food? Okay, but there's also a psychological component to the way that we eat and to the types of food that we're choosing. Our emotions and our body chemistry can influence our food choices in a very powerful way. So, for example, when the body is lacking energy, it craves an instant sugar rush. Okay, we know intuitively that if we are tired, that we eat something, we're going to typically the body, because again, a lot of this is happening behind the scenes, more subconsciously. The body knows that if you are tired, you need sugar, and you start to get those cravings for things that are sugary, because that's going to provide you with an instant sugar rush. Now, what the body is asking for, it could be getting from an apple, like the original fast food, right? Fruit is a great place for you to get more of an energy hit. Typically, that's not how we experience those cravings, though. We experience those cravings for like the chocolate bars and the things that really give us that sweet fix. When we're feeling down emotionally, when we're low, we have cravings for foods that elicit the feelings of comfort. That's one that we all probably can relate to, eating our feelings, emotional eating. Food addictions are also very prevalent in our society, and they're very rarely talked about. And it's kind of a hard thing to talk about, because food is something that is so prominent. I mean, we have to eat it, right? And because food is something that we have to eat, it's very, addictions for food can kind of go unnoticed, even by our own selves. Okay, so these types of substances, like refined sugar, like caffeine and other stimulants, like alcohol, are considered drugs, and they actually have the same neurological effects on the brain as substances like heroin or cocaine. And I think that's really important to know. You can actually do a quick Google search to find a brain map of the brain on sugar versus the brain on heroin or cocaine. And what you'll find is that the dopamine receptors, those like feel good receptors in the brain, are equally as excited when consuming or under the influence of certain types of narcotics and under the influence of sugar. And that's important to know. I think sometimes that, for me, that was very empowering, that it was like, oh, I'm addicted. It's not that I'm weak. It's not that I'm unable to make these better decisions for myself. There is a food addiction at play here, and it's very real. And that's just my experience. So these are things that start to contribute to the way that we eat and why we're eating. Okay. Another thing that's really important to understand, and I briefly mentioned this about the zinc deficiency, but the foods that we're craving go hand in hand with nutritional deficiencies that we might have in the body. Okay, so when our body is depleted of specific nutrients needed to nourish and balance us, it's going to cue cravings that aim to essentially nourish these deficiencies. Okay, so emotional and psychological patterns are another driving factor. Often we are operating on autopilot, so without any mindfulness, and when there is an emotional stimulus, we respond mechanically. I don't know how many of you can relate to, and I find this myself. I often like to share these stories of, my struggles with food, because there have been many times where I notice I'm feeling low, or there's been like a trigger that I'm working through, and shortly after that experience, there's a food craving that comes up. And I've had this, because I've been working on this idea of mindfulness. So I've got this like nutritionist on one shoulder and this person that's dealing with some really dark stuff on the other shoulder. And it's like, why? Like, you're not even hungry, and yet you're craving this thing because you're trying to change the way that you're feeling ultimately. Okay. And then again, with food addiction, our body becomes addicted to some of these hormones, this dopamine that's released after eating certain foods. And so we have to be super mindful about, how we're choosing to put certain fuels and certain substances into our bodies, knowing, and I think we've all experienced this, like you get like that sugar rush, right? We can all probably relate, if you drink coffee or tea, to the feeling of energy that comes after we've consumed these things, but also sometimes the energy crash as well that comes afterwards, right? So just understanding how we are interacting with, we're creating, every time we take something into our bodies from outside of us, we are essentially creating alchemy. We are changing the chemical disposition of our being in that moment, which is going to have an impact on everything. Okay, so eating as a practice of mindfulness. Okay, so mindfulness, basically, if we were going to kind of pair mindfulness with food, it would be that we're choosing to eat in a way that nourishes and sustains us, And that choice actually requires such a great deal of mindfulness. Okay, so practicing mindfulness, and this is what I love about the practice of mindfulness, is that it's not just something that we do in one aspect of our life. It's something that we can actually take and apply to many different aspects of our life. And really, what it points to is an idea of like self awareness. Okay, so that brings us to our next point, awareness, which is really the ability to look within, to observe as a neutral witness, not in judgment. That's not helpful, but as more like a curiosity. Why do I do the things that I do? Why do I have these certain cravings and addictions? Why do I have these certain like loops and patterns that I'm playing through? So awareness here would be to identify the patterns and cycles that are really key to making lasting changes that support our health. Okay, we cannot make changes unless we identify what needs to be improved in the first place. Right. And I like looking at this more so under the lens of like, I want to feel vital. I don't want to feel exhausted all the time. I don't want to eat in a way. For me personally, having the experience of working with depression and anxiety, I have to be very careful about the choices that I'm making. For example, caffeine. When I choose to consume caffeine, it can stimulate an anxiety attack within me. So I have to be very selective and very self-aware of when I can use caffeine and when I can't use caffeine. And I also have to be very aware of my intake of sugar, because I have done my own self-research, and this is just my experience. And this is where mindfulness is so important, because there is no one way. Like, everybody is so different. So I've observed within myself, and this happens typically around Christmas time if I'm not careful. There was a particular, I think 2 years ago now, 2 holidays ago, where we got loads of chocolate just gifted to us. People were leaving it at our doorstep. We had this particular job that we were working in, and we were working with a lot of elderly people, and they were just like showering us with chocolate. I can't even tell you how much chocolate I ate that December. And what followed in January, just like clockwork, was a 6-week, very deep, very dark depression. And I had to self-reflect in that moment. It took me a while to make the connection, and I actually needed help to make that connection. That what I had done was, I know how these things affect me, and I had sort of forgotten. I wasn't mindful in those moments. I was mindlessly consuming all of the chocolate, and plunged myself into this experience, which is an experience that I have to be careful with. I'm managing these expressions of mental health through lifestyle and through diet, so I have to be very mindful about that. Okay, another thing, if we're going to eat with mindfulness, is that there needs to be a component of like ritual involved. And I find ritual is so important, because typically we have a morning ritual. We get up and maybe we go to the bathroom, and that's like the first thing that we do. Or maybe we get up and we start the kettle to make our coffee, or whatever it is that we do. These all become little rituals, and this is what lends to like the certain lifestyle that we need. So if we're going to make new changes, we almost have to instill into our lifestyle some non-negotiables when it comes to our diet that start to help us practice nourishment. It's not just this one-off thing, like nourishment is a moment-to-moment choice that we're making with everything that we choose. Okay, and this is not to say that there's no room for little indulgences here and there. Mindful indulgences, absolutely. Absolutely. And understanding what the cost of those indulgences are. Okay, and then patience is another part of this practice, because this is a process, and we want to seek to understand how food interacts with us, how we interact with food. And we don't want to do it in a way that's critical. That is like the root and the basis for a lot of the conversations around food in our society. And it's very full of self-loathing, and it's very full of body hatred, and wanting to, most of the time when we look to change our diet, it's not because we want to be more energetic. It's not because we want to have a more balanced mental health experience. Typically, it's because we have found something about our physical appearance that we don't like, and we want to change it. And I really hope to kind of change the way that we look at diet, because that's one way. I don't think that that's really the most sustainable way. And we go through these cycles of making changes and falling off the wagon and all of these things. And so if we approach our whole experience with a sense of curiosity, a sense of being like an investigative researcher, I want to figure myself out, Why do I experience the things that I experience? And is there anything at all that I can do? And if diet is like one little tiny tool in your tool belt, in addition to all the other tools that we're learning, like breath work, like movement, like, all sorts of things that we can start to uncover, then these are little practices that we can include to support us as we are seeking additional external support in our lives. Okay, so what's important, and I have this written at the bottom, is that we need to allow our losses, which I don't believe that there's losses, I believe that there's learning, that our losses should be as important and as meaningful as our wins, the moments that we make choices that we feel really empowered about. Those processes, for example, the story that I told about eating all the chocolate and then delving into this really low, dark period, that was a really important experience for me to have. And it was important for me to see the correlation very vividly show up in my life, because now I can notice it a little bit sooner, and I can start to understand that every choice that I make has a cost. And there are times when I can afford to eat more chocolate and times when I can't afford. And so it sort of allowed me to really up level my experience of mindfulness when it comes to nutrition and eating. Okay, this is one of my favorite quotes, and I think this actually comes from my yoga studies, but the mind makes an excellent servant and a terrible master. So you want to observe your mind and the way that it operates. It needs the guidance and direction of your conscious awareness. Otherwise, it operates in response to our every whim, our every emotion, our every desire, all of our senses. In yoga philosophy, they talk a lot about this metaphor of the mind, almost like the chariot is our mind, and the thinking mind is the charioteer, and the senses are like the horses, and the horses are just kind of roaming based on what they perceive all around them. And so we need to have that charioteer that's in charge of the reins to keep everything focused. If we were just responding to every whim, we're not necessarily making choices from a place of being mindful. Okay, so this is where like the practice of really questioning yourself, not in a critical way, in a curious, playful, lighthearted way. Why am I making this choice? Not just around food, but like literally around any choice that you make. Watch the way that there's an aspect of your mind that will justify and protect your decisions. And that's okay. It's a process to become more mindful, especially around food and eating. And it really starts with our awareness and our observation. Okay, so this is kind of like a play on another quote that I've changed the words to a little bit. Before you eat, ask yourself these 3 questions. And if the answer is no to any one of them, maybe reconsider. Okay, first question, is this real food? If it had a barcode, maybe not real. If it has a list of ingredients, maybe not real. If you can pronounce all the ingredients, okay, yeah, we're getting closer to the real deal. Okay, is this food supportive of my goals for well-being? If I eat this, will it offer sustenance to my body? Okay, now, this is not to say that you need to apply these questions with every single thing that you eat. The level of mindfulness is just something that we want to work towards, so that the majority of the time we're making decisions that really support us. That way we can afford those other decisions that we go to a birthday party, or we want to celebrate something and there's cake and we want to enjoy it super mindfully, each bite, savor it. We want to be able to not be derailed, especially when it comes to our internal well-being, our mental well-being, by some of the choices that we make out of, celebration or joy. It's important to be able to have that balance. Okay, so things to remember. Emotions. Your body is not a dumpster for your unwanted emotions. Don't eat your feelings. That's a really huge principle, and that's a huge driving force between, what makes us choose certain foods over another. Okay, instead we want to be able to learn how to feel our feelings and process them, versus eat something that's going to essentially alter our emotional landscape, be it temporarily or not. Okay, then we have cravings. So we need to remember that cravings are often a sign of underlying deficiencies. What is your body actually trying to tell you? And I will include some PDFs for like what these cravings mean, because typically they're suggesting something. So when we have, let's say, a craving for something that's salty, we need sodium, but we don't want to get like refined salt. That's not like a bag of chips isn't going to give you what the body's trying to communicate. The body's trying to communicate, hey, I need like minerals. Give me some sea vegetables, seaweed. Give me dark leafy greens. There's all sorts of places where we can find the type of minerals that the body is asking for outside of the bag of chips that we're going to eat. It's going to satisfy us in sort of like the mental dopamine response, but then it's going to leave us feeling hungry and empty, and we're still going to have those cravings. Okay, hydration is another big one. My personal belief and what I've experienced with a lot of my clients is that we are overfed and underwatered in our society. So what people don't often understand, because we haven't been taught this, is that the feeling that you associate with hunger, like that growling in your stomach, that's actually a thirst cue. And by the time that you actually feel thirsty in your mouth, that is dehydration. And so it's important to understand that not every single time you feel something in your belly does it mean that it's time to eat. Often it's a sign that you are thirsty. Okay, and I think a lot of us have maybe heard, if you feel like you're hungry, have a glass of water, wait 20 minutes and see if you still feel the same way. Okay, so consider, and this is important because a lot of the times, if you are somebody, I used to be like this, who I would drink water and I literally have to go to the bathroom all the time. I cannot, like, it's like it goes right through me. And I used to think it was because I had a small bladder, but what's actually happening is that my water wasn't, it didn't have enough minerals that I could actually absorb the water. So I wasn't actually getting or retaining the water that I was drinking. And as a result of always having to go to the bathroom, now that's also the diuretic effects of coffee and tea that are going to cause us to have to expel water more frequently. So as I started to shift my relationship with caffeine, that's also started to allow me to retain a little bit more water. But a lot of the times for people, we're just not like our tap water just doesn't have the right mineral balance. And so one thing that I tell a lot of clients is that if you added just a little bit of pink salt, like that pink Himalayan or even the gray Celtic sea salt, just a pinch to your water, you're gonna have to acquire taste for it, but you don't want it to be like a super, it's not like drinking from the ocean. But this little bit of pink salt, that's actually a great source of our electrolytes. That's got all of the minerals that make up what our electrolytes are that keep us incredibly hydrated. And our electrolytes are so important for transmitting information. And that's a really important thing to understand. If we are dehydrated, the brain communication to body is not going to be working at its peak foundation. So making sure that we prioritize hydration is huge. A little bit of pink salt or gray Celtic sea salt to your water. I sometimes like to add like the juice of a citrus just because it makes it tasty. So that's something that we can do that's going to help us be able to really boost our hydration levels. And if we could prioritize drinking fresh filtered water first thing in the morning, that is optimal. Especially before we've had any type of caffeine, because one thing that we have to remember about caffeine and stimulants that we drink is that they are diuretics. So what they do is they have us expelling water. So every time that you drink a cup of coffee, you put yourself into a deficit. And so the ideal thing is that if you drink, say, a cup of coffee, you need to have double the amount of water, and that brings you back to base. That doesn't mean that you're hydrated. It means like you're back to ground zero, and then you can start building your hydration from there. So for me, when I look at drinking coffee, I'm like, can I afford to drink coffee? Am I actually committed to drink that amount of water and then start my hydration? So just little things to consider. Okay, I have divinity in here. This is a personal belief, but this is that, you know, we are divine. We're conscious. Every cell in our body is conscious, and as such, when you eat, think, or act, that you're acting on behalf of consciousness. And you know, we've all heard this term that your body is a temple. If we really truly embodied that, would it change the way that we eat? Would it change the way that we think about ourselves? Would it change the way that we act? Just little things to consider. Okay, so I love this quote by Jim Rohn: take care of your body because it's the only place you have to live. Okay, so things to consider before you eat. And this might sound silly. Am I hungry? Am I really hungry, or am I avoiding something? Am I bored? Do I need a hug? Right? Like, what's actually driving why I'm eating? Do I need comfort, advice, support, validation, rest? What do I really need here? Am I hungry? How do I feel? That's another great question before we eat. Get in the habit of checking in with yourself. How do you feel before meals, after meals? This is something that's really worth observing. And I think this is like a long process. This is something I've done over the years to really understand how certain food makes me feel in order to make an informed decision whether or not I want to continue having certain foods as a frequent part of my diet. How do I feel? What do I feel like? How does my mood change? How does even like my bowel movements, how does that all change after I've eaten one thing versus another thing? Start to become an investigative researcher. How do you feel before food, after food, while eating? Notice your sleep patterns. That's one thing that I've only really over the last 2 years started to really observe. If I'm eating late at night, and I've gone through this phase where my schedule's changed. And so I'm working at times that maybe other people are eating dinner. And so when do I eat? Do I eat afterwards at 9 o'clock? Do I eat beforehand? And so this is something that I've noticed, that eating late at night can lead to a really poor sleep. And sleep should be its own mineral, its own nutrient. It's so incredibly important to our well-being. Okay, and then choices. Thinking about your choices. When I say yes to something, what am I saying no to? How are my choices impacting me and the life that I desire to create for myself? And that again is like this piece of mindfulness. Can I afford to make the choice that I'm making, whether it be around food? I like to imply this as well to even just like certain conversations or certain people maybe that have access to me. Is that something that feels supportive right now? Or can I afford to make this choice? Okay, so main goals of nourishment. Main principles, sorry. I'm trying to move this little box around so I can see. Okay, so main principles of nourishment. Really simple. I mean, this is, we all know at I think a fundamental level. I think even in kindergarten, we're given this like, eat your fruits and vegetables. We all know that that's important, right? So the priorities and principles of nourishment, and this goes for anybody of any particular dietary system, eat real food. So as much as you can, as often as you can, consume fresh whole foods that are close to their natural form. No barcodes, limited ingredients. Okay? Eat mostly plants. Every plate should be loaded with live plant foods in a variety of colors and should make up the bulk of our plates. And actually what you'll find is they're so full of fiber, you don't have to eat that much of them. They're so full of fiber that they actually require a considerable amount of energy to digest, and they satiate us for a long period of time. Okay, and then don't eat too much. Simple, easier said than done. We are, again, overfed and underwatered. And so try switching this around. Drink more water and eat smaller portions of food and just see how you feel. And just see how you experience hunger as you start to up-level your hydration. And all of this is something that starts to really contribute to our experience of mental well-being. Health is a state of complete harmony of the body, mind, and spirit. Okay, this is a very holistic quote. To be in the practice of nourishment is to be in a daily moment-to-moment practice of mindful awareness. I personally don't believe that we can practice awareness or mindfulness without applying it to the concept of how we eat. Mindfulness is something that we can apply across the board. Okay, so just something to contemplate. The soul is characterized by these capacities: self-nutrition, sensation, thinking, and movement. So I'm just going to stop the sharing screen. I think this is the last slide. And I want to kind of just recap. There are a lot of things, a lot of different types of foods and drinks that ultimately can contribute to really deregulating our nervous system. As we know, our nervous system, is responsible for our stress response. The parasympathetic nervous system versus the sympathetic nervous system. You've got your sympathetic fight or flight, which as humans, we spend way more time than that system was ever designed for us to spend in it. That was meant to be kind of like our acute survival sense, so that if we were running for our lives, that we would be able to flee and escape to safety. And then we are supposed to be able to resume to our natural state of being, which is the parasympathetic rest and repair, rest and procreate, rest and digest. And our society has spent chronically a lot more time in that stress state than anything else. And there are ways that the substances that we're interacting with are negatively impacting our ability to regulate the system. So there is something called the vagus nerve that is the longest cranial nerve that travels from the brain into the gut. That's that gut-brain connection that we talk about. And what's important to understand about that, especially about the gut in general, there are some pretty major hormones that are manufactured in the gut. And we don't typically think about the gut as a place for like manufacturing important hormones, but there is about 80% of our serotonin, which maybe we've heard that hormone before. That's our feel-good hormone. It's a hormone that is widely associated with patients that are experiencing depression or depressive symptoms are lacking in serotonin. 80% manufactured in the gut. So if the gut is not working optimally, we're not going to be manufacturing what we need to manufacture in order to experience that state of wellness, of well-being. Okay, there's also another hormone that is directly responsible for our blood sugar balance that's manufactured by the gut. And this is important because if you've ever experienced yourself or been around someone who is hangry, you know right away that your blood sugar balance, that's what's happening when somebody is experiencing like hanger. Their blood sugar levels have dropped to a place that they are experiencing anger. It's altering their mood. And serotonin is another mood altering hormone. So, you know, that's like our disposition we're talking about now, how we experience life that can be influenced by the gut. And of course, that's not the only contribution to how we experience life. But I figure that if we can empower ourselves by at least upping our chances to experience a little bit more ease in our lives while we are on our journey, whatever that looks like, maybe it's healing, maybe it's, you know, bringing ourselves back into well-being and nourishment, that if we can apply these little things, and they're not really little because food is loaded. I mean, it's a triggered topic. It's a hard thing to start to make changes to, but even if we picked one thing, okay? So we've got these hormones that are being manufactured by the gut. And there are other ways that we can stimulate the vagus nerve, which is that gut-brain connection, through breath work, through twists and core, abdominal core work, which you don't even have to do. Twisting and breathing is enough. And you can do that seated in your chair. Making these decisions around food is another way. If we really understood that almost like food is like this currency that's going to impact us in one way or another, it can be a very empowering approach to our overall well-being if we understand that making certain food choices, and I say, like, don't take my word for it, start to experiment with yourself, you know, get a journal and start to take notes about how you feel. Don't even change your diet right off the bat. Just start to observe, how is my particular diet making me feel? Just start to look. How do I feel after eating certain things? You know how sometimes when you get really sick with the flu or the cold or something and your appetite has gone down, and after you get better, you start to experience like that ravenous hunger, but there's a period of time where you feel a little bit more balanced right before we start diving back into our regular diet. Fasting is, for me, a really important way that we can start to kind of reset. And it's not always something that works for everybody. And we can talk about even intermittent fasting, like we maybe have our last meal at a certain time in the evening, 6 or 7 o'clock, and then we're not eating again until maybe later on in the morning, 10, 11 o'clock, and just starting to stretch that window of time without food and really start to pay attention to how we feel. And reframing for ourselves, what is hunger? So I would encourage all of you, this is something that's been, you know, impactful for me, and everybody's journey is different, but start to keep a journal. Like, what are your bowel movements like? That's important too. That gives you a lot of information, and it's something that we're not always super comfortable talking about, but like, have a peek when you go to the bathroom. Look, what do you see? There is, and I can include this as a PDF as well. There's a chart that we're looking for on like a scale of, I think it's 1 to 7. And we're looking for, a bowel movement that's somewhere in between that indicates that the bowels are working properly. How frequently are we going, or how infrequently are we going? It's important to understand that as you become constipated, that what happens in your colon is that all the toxins, because remember, like stool is waste. We are excreting waste from the body. And the body is so good at taking care of itself that it has all of these natural detoxification processes. And so through this process of elimination, we're excreting toxins, except for that when we get constipated, which often happens because we're not hydrated enough, then all of a sudden these toxins that are absorbed in our stool starts to recirculate through the blood system. And we are impacting our liver with a lot more work to do. Now, there's in the practice of holistic nutrition, we look sometimes at what we call psycho-spiritual connections. So it is said that the liver is the site of suppressed anger. Okay, so imagine then if we are constipated and we're releasing all of these extra toxins back into the bloodstream, if we experience anger as like a natural state of being, the liver is going to be inflamed and aggravated. And there's all sorts of other body systems that are related to these deeper emotions, whether you choose to buy into that or not. I say trust your own experience, and start getting really curious. So as we start to keep a journal, it's not necessarily, about criticizing the things that we eat. It's about making connections. It's about understanding. And then I encourage you to create an actual experiment. So maybe you do a week or 2 or 3 or 4 of your normal day-to-day diet without changing anything about the way that you eat and drink. And keep note of how you feel. And then do one thing differently. Keep note. Maybe 2 things. Keep note. Keep track. What does it feel like to drink more water and eat less? Not less in terms of we don't want to completely eradicate food. Food is incredibly important for us to eat, but hydration is huge. We are like 80% water. And a lot of us are walking around incredibly dehydrated, which is going to affect our ability to concentrate. It's going to affect our mood. It's going to affect our energy levels. And so, it's about making these connections. When we start talking about mindfulness with food, it's about making these connections and really using yourself as an example. That's where intuitive eating really comes from. If we're going to eat intuitively, we have to be mindfully aware of how we feel. And it's not about achieving a perfection in our diets. It's not at all the case. It's about understanding that when I make these choices, I feel this way. And when I make those choices, I feel this way. How do I want to feel? If any of you can relate to, and this used to be my experience, I don't consume dairy anymore because most of us are or have experienced lactose intolerance, and going through these, state cravings where I would make the conscious choice. I'm going to have ice cream and I am going to pay for it, but I don't care. I'm making that choice. Like I'm super aware of the choice that I'm making, and I'm going to choose to pay for this choice later, and that awareness is great. And maybe eventually we get sick of paying for that mistake and we start to go maybe for the dairy-free ice cream, or maybe we start to realize that sugar is impacting us in a way, and we start to learn maybe how to, just up level some of the choices that we're making. So this is really sort of like an entry into the idea of exercising some awareness around the choices that we make and how food is impacting us, and understanding that your body is this like biological garden. And I often say this, I have a little sister who is autistic. And so she, everything is very literal to her. And I'll often say, she'll ask for something specific that I'm trying to encourage her to maybe make a better decision around. I'm like, okay, well, Coca-Cola, let's use that as an example. Is that good for you? Well, she says, just sometimes. I said, okay, why don't we take some Coca-Cola and we'll go water the garden with the Coca-Cola? She's like, no. Why not? Because the plants will die. I'm like, okay. Do you think then if it's not good for the plants, it's maybe not as good for us as well, right? It's making these little connections about how we understand what we're putting into our bodies and how we feel after consuming certain things. So this is an entry level into really awareness, which I believe that we can apply to every aspect of our lives. And food is a place where we will directly start to experience the way that it alters our mood and our state of being. And when we're in a place where we're trying to really support our state of being, it can be really helpful to support ourselves from all angles. And it's taken me years and years and years to really fully start practicing that, because it's not easy to make those changes. But little things, just starting with little things, more water, more vegetables, maybe swapping a chocolate bar for a piece of fruit, go through like the grocery store and just pick a different fruit every time, find something that you're obsessed with, enjoy it, and start to create healthier habits and really take notice as an investigator. How does it make me feel? Is there something that's changing here? It takes time, which is unfortunate, with any type of a healthy lifestyle. It takes time and consistency in order to really start to see these benefits and these changes. But I personally think that we're all worth that extra little bit of TLC. And I think that when we're able to get on board with at least just being more mindful, it's going to eventually lend to us making different decisions. Maybe not right away, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not 10 years from now, maybe it takes a long time. But I mean, the practice of being mindful is something that we can apply across the board in our lives. And so whether or not you choose to apply it to food or not, it's totally up to you. And I just like to kind of discuss some of these different things to be aware of and to be thinking about why we feel hungry and what really is driving the choices that we're making around food, and how, a lot of the things I didn't realize that deficiencies in certain nutrients when I first started on this path were actually going to be responsible for the way that I see myself. That's important, or even for the hormones that I'm producing or not producing. So that is, for me, relevant information that maybe we can just kind of like nibble on, pardon the pun, and contemplate in our own experiences and really use your own experience. I really firmly don't believe at all that there's one specific diet for everybody. I think usually what I work with clients, it's not necessarily about like radically changing the diet. It's like making small swaps. Okay, you seem to have a sweet tooth. Amazing. Let's find something really healthy for you to enjoy and replace that. And we're just going to start there. Right. And it's just like, let's not be unrealistic. Anytime I come up with a plan for a client, it always includes dessert. Like we have to, or something salty, whatever their vice is, it has to meet you where you are. Otherwise it's not sustainable. And ultimately, what is the goal? So for me, the practice of nourishment and the practice of, dietary awareness, I suppose we could call it, is really this intention that I want to support my mental well-being. That's really like what I bought into this practice for, is to support my mental well-being. So I hope that, through some of this information, you feel inspired, and that if nothing else, just curious to start bringing more awareness and more mindfulness into, your dietary practices. And it is a practice. The way we eat, like we're conditioned, we are practicing a certain way of eating. And so, changing the way that we do anything takes a level of mindfulness, but it starts with awareness. And so can we just start to shine a brighter light on some of these things that maybe we mindlessly engage in? So thank you so much for joining. I do have some PDFs with recipes and things like this, and so we'll find a way to include those somewhere here that you'll have access to. Thank you so much for taking the time to come along on this talk, and I hope that there's at least one thing that just kind of like piqued your interest or your awareness that you can start to work with. And please, remember to be playful and curious when it comes to this type of self-awareness. We have enough going on in our society that, really is too hard on us. And so it's important for us to be gentle with ourselves, and for us to really just take the neutral place of awareness that we're just observing, not to criticize, but just to understand. And if we can understand, then maybe we can make different choices. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day wherever you are. And I hope to connect with you again soon.